Vladimir Putin said that American journalist Megyn Kelly had no right to ask him about charges. His regime was repressive and killed journalists. Wow, I'm joined right now by Carter Page, former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Carter, who do you agree with there? Do you think that Vladimir Putin is right in saying we have no right to question him?
Chris, if he were asked that question once, that would be fine. If he's asked that, or if there's allegations constantly every day in all of the major newspapers in the United States and in all of the major cable networks, after months and months and years and decades on end, then it becomes a little old. You could imagine if someone.
Well, sure, but if it's true, it should be old. It should be relentless. Do you believe he does kill reporters who he doesn't like?
I don't know anything about that.
You don't know?
Let me tell you.
You think he's innocent of that?
I think that it's interesting with the January 6th intel report. One of the big things they're talking about is that the Russian government shouldn't put out certain quote-unquote propaganda. All of the Russian RT and Sputnik, the information in there, at least about myself, was infinitely more accurate than all the lies.
So you don't believe RT is a propaganda arm of the Russian government?
All I know is that the information they were putting out was.
But you know, you're a Russian expert. What do you mean you don't know whether they're a propaganda arm?
Well, it's infinite. All I know is that it's infinitely more accurate than
no, that's
everything
just a way
in
of
that
evading
dossier.
my question. Is it a propaganda arm, RT?
I think it's less of a it's equally propagandistic or less propagandistic than Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which in September and again in November was just repeating the dodgy dossier.
I get the feeling from what you're saying and from what Vladimir Putin just said in the interview last night that he believes that, maybe you do too, that the bad relations between the United States and Moscow right now are caused by American media.
No, I don't. That's.
He seemed to be saying that.
No, I think that's one symptom of a larger illness, which goes back many, many decades. So.
Do you think we should have better relations with Russia?
Absolutely.
Is that why you went to work for Trump?
I believe in a lot of.
You like what Trump was saying?
I like more broadly in terms of his foreign policy. I think he's really trying to make some significant steps forward. What he was saying. But you
came to as a Russian expert. That's how you got in the door, right?
No, it's funny. I'm always branded as such. The number of times I talked about Russia proportionally is minuscule. Partially because these false allegations started against me from the very beginning. Well,
anyway, let's talk about Putin again. He also suggested the 2016 hacking might have been carried out by an American intelligence agency. What do you make of that?
Well, if let's see what happens with these allegations regarding the FISA warrant against me.
No, let's make it what he made. What he said that the CIA, if the CIA killed Kennedy, which I don't believe is true, then they might have done the hacking, not him. Do you think he did the hacking? And it's come up with this cockamamie story about conspiracy to get out of it.
Well, all I know is
do you believe he did hacking?
I've been hacked.
Do you believe that the Russians hacked into the DNC and the rest of the effort to try to manipulate this election?
I'm not fully convinced about that.
You're not convinced of that?
I think January 6th was largely a political stunt.
What's that?
Just the 2 weeks before the election, without much basis. I think there's I have a lot of questions about that January 6th report.
The report, the
DNI report. The DNI report.
Okay, let me ask you about Trump. So in other words, the whole American storyline that the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies said the Russians hacked into our system and tried to manipulate our election, you don't believe?
I think all I know is that the accusations and the against myself, which is a part of this overall intel story, was totally false.
Let's talk about
it. If they got that wrong, then
let's talk about the encounter you had with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador. You met with him in Cleveland during the Republican National Convention. Fair enough. And here's how former campaign advisor J.D. Gordon described your involvement in that meeting in Politico in March. Quote, Gordon said Page and Kislyak, that's you and Kislyak, spoke at some length about how to improve relations between the two countries on issues like counterterrorism and energy security. Carter told him we should have a new chapter of U.S.-Russian relations that build on mutual respect and common goals, and that there is no need to keep up this hostility, Gordon said. Is that true?
I don't recall that conversation. There were brief interactions at receptions.
That's not a brief interaction.
I never had any.
But you say it was a casual hello, how are you? And at the same time, you said you made a deal at the end of the meeting. It was off the record.
No, That was the deal from the beginning. Everyone in that meeting was.
I've never shook hands with somebody and had them say this handshaking's off the record.
No, everyone in that meeting, it was agreed that it would be off the record. Yes. Yeah.
How was that agreement struck?
Well, it was
Somebody
announced
said
at the beginning. Yeah, at the.
And who made the announcement?
I actually came in late, but that was speaking of the organizers.
And who were the organizers?
I forget their.
No, you were meeting with a bunch of Russians, including Kislyak, at the Republican convention, and you don't remember who
He's the only
invited
Russian.
you to the meeting?
I can't even recall.
You can't recall inviting to a meeting with the Russian ambassador?
It wasn't a meeting with the Russian ambassador, Chris. It was meetings with ambassadors from around the world.
This is what's squirrely about your argument here. It was no big deal. It was just, hello, how are you? But it was off the record, and we agreed to make it off the record. What's off the record? In journalism, off the record has a particular meaning. You can't use it in a story. You can know it, of course, but you can't use it.
There's a lot of meetings at think tanks, et cetera, that sometimes are either not for attribution or off the record, and that's
What, was it a sensitive discussion?
No, I think it's just
it was
to
off the record. Why would you say off the record?
To allow people to have an open discussion without having it broadcast
Did you talk
on
about
national
sanctions?
television. No.
You didn't talk about sanctions. Did you talk about improved Russian relations with the United States? You're talking with the Russian ambassador.
I can't recall any.
Did you talk about the Ukraine and our sanctions because of that?
Definitely not.
You didn't talk about that. You didn't talk about that. You didn't talk about the stories that the DNC had been hacked into.
That hadn't even happened yet. Remember,
it was the week before,
right?
Claimed it. Yeah, they claimed it then. So what was the conversation about? You say it's off the record. Do you remember the conversation?
The most interesting conversation
at the Republican convention.
There were a lot of policy discussions in general throughout that week. To me, that was the thing that I was most focused on. Unfortunately, we're not able to talk about that.
Let's try to put this in the context of your thinking, Carter. You're a PhD, right?
Yeah.
And what's your PhD in?
In Central Asia.
Okay, so you're an expert in that part of the world over there, the Crimea and all that stuff. And you joined the Trump campaign. Eddie Cox, a good guy, a lawyer in New York, helped you get in the door. You show up. What was your motive in joining the Trump campaign? You liked this general worldview, right? Nationalism.
It's not nationalism.
Nothing wrong with nationalism. What did you like about him?
I liked the Russia issue, frankly, is very similar to the Iraq issue in the 2008 Obama campaign. He wanted to start a new step forward in terms of what was going on in Iraq, pulling out from this constant conflict we've had over here. My view, and I have always believed that, and I believe this to this day, he has tremendous potential to actually do that. And I think there's
well, that's a pretty worthy goal.
Forward. Absolutely.
Well,
unfortunately, we can't talk about that because we're swirling around whether or not I met
question
Kislyak.
to you is, and you're one of the figures in it, according to the news reporting, and you're one of the names like Manafort and Flynn I keep hearing about. It struck me from the outside, looking at this, that what you guys were trying to do with Trump's leadership was to try to restart our relations with Russia and try to avoid a second Cold War. And the idea, you're shaking your head yes or no? I can't read you.
It's not that central of an argument. I mean. Part of
what were all these meetings about? What was your why were you brought into the campaign if it wasn't because of your Russian expertise?
I can't speak to that, Chris. I have done a lot in international relations going back throughout most of my life, since serving in the Navy, since U.S.-Russia arms control negotiations in the Pentagon. I've done tens of billions of dollars of energy deals. So
so you won't tell us about what happened in the meeting because you don't remember it or you don't care. It's a big part of the story. You don't think it's important to tell anybody this?
I think it's not an important part of the story.
It's important enough for you guys to say this is off the record. Nobody talk about what we had in this meeting.
I'm being respectful of discussion.
You made some charges about people coming after you, and I don't know, you seem like okay to me, but you're blaming people coming at you because you're Catholic. Now, I find that quizzical. Why would you say something like that in the 21st century, that there's an anti-Catholicism in American politics? Explain.
It's somewhat of a long story, but it's there were interactions with members of the Clinton campaign where I got that impression.
What they say?
So, it's a long story.
No, give me the short version. What did they say against you that made you think it was religion that was bugging them?
I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. I'll get into it at some point.
Well, no, here you are. You've said this charge. I find it hard to believe. I mean, there are arguments about same sex. There's arguments about abortion rights. These are arguments we're all familiar with. We argue about them in the public square. There's nothing weird about it. They're good arguments. People argue. What's the argument that you felt was coming against you?
Well, I've had a number of discussions with Madeleine Albright. Right. And she had, you know, I had mentioned a number of times the fact that I got my master's in national security at Georgetown.
Sure.
And one of the things that I was really inspired by being back after having spent 4 years at the Naval Academy, government institution where it's non-religious, is
well, they have a famous foreign service school there. It's a very famous school.
Well, and I was inspired to being back part of the Catholic community. And suffice to say, I just didn't. There were issues from that discussion where I didn't feel comfortable.
I think she was raised Catholic anyway. But you felt it was an anti-Catholic thing. This whole thing you think is anti-religious? Well,
no, I think, look, it's hard to differentiate when there was definitely a lot of hatred sent against me. The Catholic thing is actually something which is covered under the Civil Rights Act. So.
Yeah, if it's true, and you think it is true. You think you're the victim of religious prejudice.
I think there's a lot of prejudices. But to me, the bigger prejudice, the more immediate thing, is the bigotry and xenophobia against Russians. And I think that's unfortunately been holding this country back for 70 years. Okay, my big question of this whole thing. If his goal, the candidate you supported, Trump, if his goal was to reestablish something beyond the Cold War, something that was a good relationship between us and Russia, if that was the goal, and all these meetings that went on with Manafort and all these meetings with Flynn and yourself and anybody else in all these meetings, you won't tell me what happened at them. If the whole purpose of that was a sort of rapprochement between these two great countries, why wouldn't you brag about it instead of hiding with all this stuff about immunity and all this stuff about Fifth Amendment rights and executive privilege? Kelly Conway's talking about, Kelly is talking about everything is trying to be hiding. Why are you hiding if it was such a grand purpose, which was peace? Chris, it's been an ongoing assault since
Why don't you just say what you were doing? Why are you hiding these meetings?
I was doing nothing.
You have a meeting you won't tell me about. You met with the Russian ambassador at the Republican convention when they're shifting language about the Ukraine and all kinds of stuff with Crimea in the platform, and you won't tell me what the meeting was about.
The meeting was about nothing. I mean,
well, why was it secret? Why is it off the record?
Because the Russians have been lied to. With NATO expansion is a key element. Okay. They were told at the end of the Cold War that we're not going to expand NATO. Yeah. It was a verbal. It was nothing legal.
I mean, not even the Baltic states. I thought the Baltic states were going to join NATO, but go ahead.
Well, eventually they did,
Ukraine.
but once they changed.
Was Ukraine really on the verge of joining NATO?
Gorbachev and Reagan. You know, Tip O'Neill was involved in terms of helping to push this forward.
Compare that to Ukraine.
No, just in terms of helping to encourage some steps forward.
And you felt that was a threat to Russia.
Well, I think if there was better relationship. Could you imagine if Tip O'Neill ever tried doing what Harry Reid did to me last year?
What did he do?
Sending a letter to the FBI director saying, let's please investigate this guy because he owns a few shares in Gazprom. Yeah. So, I mean, could you imagine what would Reagan's reaction have been?
Okay, look, I never want to project what my old boss would think about something all these years later. But let me ask you your bottom sentiment about this. You think the United States and Russia should get together? You think that was the whole effort? All the Trump people were involved in that?
I don't think that's the whole effort.
Well, what is it? What's behind it? What's the big elephant in the room we're trying to figure out here? Because everybody's trying to figure it out.
It's a fake elephant, Chris. That's the whole thing.
In other words, your meetings, the secret meetings, didn't accomplish anything. Nothing happened.
Absolutely not. Nothing.
Nothing.
I was a little small fry.
But you have a goal, which is to improve our relations with Russia. Manafort, I think, was somewhat related. Flynn was certainly related to that. What were they all doing?
I don't think. I think it's totally.
So you agree with you're with Vladimir Putin last night with Megyn saying there's nothing to it. It's nonsense. You agree with Putin?
I haven't seen anything, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone ever comes out with anything.
Well, Comey thinks there's something there, and he'll be testifying Thursday, and I think there's a lot of people that think there's something there. Well, Brennan think there's something there. All our intelligence agencies believe the Russians messed with us, meddled in our election, and you don't agree with that.
Well, I hope we find out about the wiretapping since that was done against me.
Fair game. Keep fighting your fight.